Thank you for joining us for our webinar this evening. My name is Zhihan, a research associate from SSR. Today, we are thankful to have our annual social work honors thesis presentations from 3 recently graduated students from NUS who will be sharing their studies on digital privacy in social work, adult child to parent abuse, and end-of-life conversations through participatory arts. We are very thankful to the graduates, Rachel, Swetching, and Caitlin, for taking time off to share their research after office hours. So before I hand over my time to the first presenter, I will first make a few housekeeping announcements. So first, we are recording this seminar on Zoom and live streaming on our Facebook page. By participating in this seminar, you consent to the video recording, which may be used for SSR's publicity. So for this webinar, we will have a combined Q&A session after all 3 speakers have presented. So for our audience, please submit your questions via the Poll Everywhere link, which I will paste on the Zoom chat now. So as we have 3 presenters, for your questions, please indicate who your question is directed to. We will not be taking questions from the Zoom chat and the Facebook comments section. And as we have a limited amount of time, we apologize if we are unable to take all questions. If there's extra time, I may allow audience to use the virtual raise hand function to unmute your microphone and ask your questions directly. For October, SSR will be offering 2 workshops, which are open for registration. The first is on the effective use of theory of change by Dr. Robin Tan, while the second is on participatory research for social services by Dr. Hannah Al-Haddad. Do scan the QR code on the screen if you are interested to find out more. So without further ado, I will now pass my time over to the first presenter, Rachel, for her presentation. Thank you.
Hi everyone, let me share my screen. Okay, I think my screen is shared. So hi everyone, thanks for attending this series of presentations. I'm honored to be kicking us off. So if at any point if you can't really see my screen or you can't hear me talk, please do let me know. So my name is Rachel and today I'll be presenting my honors thesis on digital privacy in social work. So when we talk about digital privacy, we are also concerned with information and communication technology. So I'll be using this acronym ICT. So basically things like your phones, your computers, your digital devices, any type of technology that lets you communicate that. So as you know, ICT has been steadily growing in social services, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. And social workers have the additional responsibility of ensuring privacy for both themselves and their clients. So my research is concerned about privacy because privacy breaches can threaten the social worker-client relationship and also the individual safety. So I think particularly in Singapore, we have quite a number of cases where Singaporeans reflect quite a deep vulnerability or mistrust with how the government handles privacy. So I think there was a survey conducted that found that out of all the countries in Asia, Singaporean citizens felt the most defenses when it came to privacy. And I think in recent memory also, there were 2 major privacy breaches, which I think kind of reflect this defenselessness that they feel. So kind of in light of these situations, I've raised a few research questions for my thesis. So the first being that what are some digital privacy concerns that arise from ICT usage in social work professional practice? Following up, how do these digital privacy concerns affect the interactions between social workers and clients? And of course, I want to explore some ways where digital privacy in professional social work practice can improve. So throughout my literature review, I also identified some common themes brought up by the interviewees surrounding digital privacy. So the first is of digital communication, which is just like the act of transferring information, like texting, phone calling, emailing. And the second is privacy management, which is the decision-making process of what you choose to share, what you choose to keep private. The third theme is on like your personal boundaries and dual relationships, like how this privacy management affects or disrupts your boundaries and relationships, such as like friend requesting your clients on social media. And the fourth theme will be organizational responsibility, because there's only so much an individual can do. Like a lot of privacy issues are out of the individual's hands. For example, it can be like the platform that you're using or like the policies that your organization has. So through my literature review, I also identified some gaps that I wanted to try and broach my thesis. So for a few studies, they do survey like the frequency of different platforms, such as using WhatsApp versus using Facebook. But then like while they do like look at the frequency of usage in social services, they don't really like hypothesize or try to explain why these differences come about. And there's also another handful of studies which suggest that social workers serving different demographics can reflect different priorities with ICT usage. Like you can imagine like serving elderly clients versus serving youth clients, you'll definitely use technology differently. But ever the studies that I found, while they do like hypothesize some difference, they haven't really been able to find any like statistically significant results. So I also wanted to try and look at that. And for my thesis, I conducted 5 semi-structural interviews with 5 different people in the social work field. So because I wanted to try and like find out the differences between the different sectors or different client groups. So when I was selecting participants, I did try to vary their backgrounds and their experiences. So as you can see, I have people from medical setting, people who work with children and youth, people who work with adults. But I'm sure you guys can imagine because of that, this is not a random sample. It's kind of like a artificially manufactured variation. And out of these participants, 4 of them were my students at the time. And 1 was a graduated alumni who already started work. But of course, because of the students' limited experience, I also invited them to share about like their supervisors, their agencies, like things that they observe around them that was relevant and appropriate for them to share. But of course, you can imagine cherry picking my participants means quite a few ethical considerations as that they knew me. So in order to mitigate the risk, I also tried to assess that they had no like conflict with me or like they didn't want to sabotage my research, that kind. And I also make sure that now the questions were related to my relationship. So what are the findings of this study? So let's revisit my first question. What are the digital privacy concerns that can arise from ICT usage? So one of the main concerns highlighted by the interviewees is that they themselves have limited information on digital privacy breaches, and they don't really take precautions. So for example, like password protecting files, like verifying clients' identity, especially over platforms where you can't see their face, like you're texting. Like these are not necessarily common practices, and social workers, when you're interacting with clients on like a casual basis, you may not take these precautions. And another one is also of the clients themselves. So some of my interviewees shared like less tech-savvy clients. They may do things like share passwords, put their own data privacy at risk. So even if the social worker themselves tries to uphold privacy on their end, it may not reflect that on the client's part. And another concern is that ICT platforms themselves, so the organizations in charge of privacy. So a common practice that we probably like or even take for granted is like being able to create anonymous accounts or like multiple accounts on the same device. Like now WhatsApp you can open on your phone, on your laptop. But then one of the privacy breaches, one of the interviewees shared an anecdote where one of their clients had WhatsApp logged into their iPad, and then they gave this iPad to a family, and this family member was able to read all the confidential information that the social worker was sharing to the client. So how do these privacy concerns affect the interaction between social worker and client? So one observation is how social workers and clients decide like whether or not these privacy breaches are worth the benefit of disclosing information. So one of the things commonly brought up during interviews was like interacting with youth clients, especially like how some of the interviews said the youth clients prefer to interact over media like Discord or Instagram because they feel more comfortable with it. But of course, the trade-off is that less secure and more informal communicating. So it's up to the social worker to decide whether like their clients' comfort and like willingness to open up is worth this privacy breach. So another observation is how the different communication platforms we interact with how different clients and social workers. So one of the things that I think a lot of agencies do is they have a personal work phone. So that's which is a good practice in my opinion, because like social workers can ensure that they don't get contact out their personal life. However, one of the comparisons that you do is some of my interviewees had landlines, which is and they reported a difference in the way that they interact with clients. So I think you can imagine that the client, if you can call someone on their personal phone, it's still a work phone, but you have like a personal phone number and they themselves will pick up. Versus if you call someone on landline, you may be put on hold, you may have to go through different routes. So you develop a more impersonal relationship. Like your boundaries will be stronger, but then like you do have a more transactional relationship. So this kind of like privacy concerns is kind of like a trade-off to whether or not what you prioritize in your work. Another interesting observation is home visits actually. So like during the pandemic, a lot of home visits were done over Zoom. Then one of my interviewees noted also like during this situation, like a lot of control of the session was put in the client's hands. Because like if the client is leading the home visit, they're moving the camera around, they can manipulate the camera angles. So it's also like you are kind of letting the client control what they want to show you. If they don't want to show you something, they can put it behind the camera or they can try to hide it from view. And like this really does shake up the client social worker dynamic as compared to in person. But this depending on your work, it may not necessarily be a bad thing. And finally, so how can digital privacy in professional social work practice improve? So firstly, like agencies can identify like common pitfalls that their social workers or clients may encounter and develop like more robust data privacy and management policies. So for example, I think quite a number of my interviewees feel like their current agencies, they don't really have some policies to cover like all the situations. So sometimes they encounter something, there's nothing like set in stone for them to follow. So for example, if your agency like demographic includes like less tech savvy clients like elderly, you have to figure out like what procedures are appropriate for them and what are not. Yeah, and then another one also, agencies can evaluate the privacy policies of the platforms they are using. Yeah, so I think for some of them, like the common ones like Telegram, where you can have like anonymity, or like WhatsApp, where you can have sharing accounts. You can kind of evaluate whether or not these privacy pitfalls are worth the trade-off of being able to use that platform. Like, is this something even within the scope of your control? So what are my limitations for this study? So I can imagine sample size of 5, not very statistically meaningful. Yeah, and then we also do have an embedded mix of social work students and that one professional who has already graduated. So I can't really generalize the results to either population. And also this is quite a top-down process. I just interviewed social workers. Of course, that's the focus of my study, but I do recognize that it does lack a client report. So whatever like privacy concerns social workers reflect may not necessarily be relevant on part of the client. And of course, the implications for my practice, I do wish to raise greater awareness for how like ICT affects digital privacy for the social workers. I also do want to like hope that social workers themselves can be more vigilant when reviewing their own privacy practices. Yeah. And for organizations, I want to like encourage like organizations to re-examine platforms used for communication and digital storage. I hesitate to give any like strict recommendations because the nature of digital privacy has been evolving quite a lot. Like I think like right now we're using Zoom, but I think last month, sometime in August, it just got into a scandal for using AI, which is, yeah, so I'm really not too sure if I can give any like recommendations. But finally, I also like to explore like how unique sectors can serve different demographics. But because of my small sample size, I also don't want to make any conclusions right now. But yeah, I think that's the end of my presentation. Thanks everyone for listening.
Okay, thank you so much, Rachel. So yeah, we will have all 3 presentations first before we have the combined Q&A session. So so now we will move on to the second presenter. Switching, please.
Yep, just give me a moment to share the screen. Yeah, okay. So good evening, everyone. I'm Swet Ching, and I'll be presenting on my thesis titled Exploring the Experiences of Social Workers in Working with Cases of Adult Child to Parent Abuse, which I'll henceforth refer to as ACPA. Yeah, and this would be the flow of my presentation. So according to Singapore's Task Force on Family Violence, there has been an emerging trend involving violence perpetrated by adult children, which I'll refer to as ACs, towards their parents, which could involve physical, psychological, and emotional violence. This trend can be understood against the context of the phenomenon of adult entitled dependence, characterized by excessive and dysfunctional dependence of group children on parents, far exceeding the norms of their culture. So in this kind of cases, ACs would typically demand for resources such as money, backed with declarations of incapacity, blame, or threats. And the parents would then tend to accommodate and respond with pity, guilt, and fear, feeding a sense of obligation to continually accommodate their needs and demands. So then, ACs may escalate and resort to violence to get their parents to comply when parents refuse to or are unable to comply with their demands. So oftentimes after this, one of the parents will concede and the vicious cycle will continue. Yeah. So looking at existing literature, it mostly focuses on violence perpetrated by adolescents or elder abuse, where victims are typically of post-retirement age and also dependent on their adult children for physical, emotional, and financial needs. But with ACPA, it's more of a reverse dependency, where the adult child is dependent on their parents. Yeah. There has also been a lack of research regarding cross-cultural differences of ACPA in terms of frequency and patterns. So as such, these were my research questions. And the study was really looking at exploring the experiences of social workers working with ACPA cases in Singapore. Yeah, so the questions are, what are the characteristics that are common amongst cases involving ACPA? How do social workers carry out assessment and intervention for such cases? And also, how do social workers evaluate their experiences working with such cases? Yeah. So given that the emerging trend of ACPA has been observed by family violence specialist centers in Singapore, purposive sampling was utilized to recruit 5 social workers from one of the 3 FVSCs in Singapore. And from this study, participants were included in if they had worked with at least one case of ACPA to ensure that they had sufficient experience working with ACPA at the point of interviews. Yeah. And all participants were also informed about the purpose of the research, what their involvement would entail, and their right to unconditionally withdraw. And to protect their confidentiality, all identifiable personal information was also replaced with positional identifiers. Yeah, so on to the findings. Due to time constraints, I'll be just presenting selected key findings that respond to each research question. Yeah. So for research question 1, on common characteristics of these cases, I think when looking at the nature of relationship between the perpetrators and victims, perpetrators are usually the adult children who live with and are dependent on their parents, the victims, for financial support. And in response to this dependency, parents would tend to accommodate to them and also find it difficult to set firm boundaries and stop the abuse. Secondly, in terms of the nature of violence, as shared earlier, violence tends to occur when the demands for certain resources are not met. And when parents accommodate to diffuse the situation, the adult children actually learn that these parents will accede to their demands if they resort to violence, which then entrenches the cycle of violence. And aside from the key function of obtaining resources, the social workers interviewed also noted that adult children may use violence to get back at their parents for what they perceive as adverse or traumatic experiences that their parents had put them through as children, and therefore they now have this expectation that their parents should support them. So overall, I think these findings revealed that the function of violence and the dynamics of the relationship are actually key in identifying a case as ACPA. So the focus is more on that sort of repeated pattern of behavior and the function of behavior, rather than just looking at isolated acts of aggression or specific demographic characteristics of the victims and perpetrators. Yeah. So for the second research question, I think the findings reflected two broad areas that social workers actually assessed on for these kind of cases, which is firstly assessment of risk, and then also assessment of ACPA-specific factors. So under risk assessment, they tend to look at latest incident of violence, perpetrator and victim characteristics, environmental factors, and also static risk factors. And the second area of assessment, which would look at exploring how parents perceive, cope with, and also influence the development of ACPA, as well as assessing the unmet needs of the adult child. Yeah, so when assessing the characteristics of these adult children, the social workers generally observed that there was a connection between their mental health condition and their abusive behavior. And previous research has shown that ACPA tends to occur in conjunction with other clinical conditions such as anxiety disorders, schizophrenia, and depression, amongst others. Yeah, and the adult child may also be socially withdrawn and feel helpless about their situation. And so then their parents become their bridge to the outside world. Yeah, moving on with intervention for such cases. I think when working with parents, social workers observe that while they might recognize that they need help and are fearful for their safety, they are also hesitant to seek help because they worry that intervention will get their child in trouble or actually cause their child's mental health to deteriorate. Moreover, they also experience a lot of mixed feelings of shame, guilt, and embarrassment, amongst other feelings. Yeah. So I think it was really important for the social workers to attend to and process these complex emotions and concerns with the parents to help them recognize that they can actually seek help for themselves and to really support the decision-making process in addressing the abuse. Yeah, and to address the ambivalence that parents might feel, social workers help them to consider really the long-term implications of continuously accommodating to their child's demands and the sustainability of doing so. Yeah, they also psychoeducated parents on the function and also cycle of violence to help facilitate the understanding that violence is not just attributed to the child's mental health condition, but also that relationship dynamic between them. So by clarifying that there is that pattern of dependency and accommodation that entrenches the dynamic and also the cycle of violence, parents could then better understand the context in which the violence is being perpetrated and see the importance of setting boundaries with their adult child to break the child's expectations that they really can get what they want through the use of violence each time. Yeah. And when working with the adult children in these cases, social workers actually shared that they express empathy for their past experiences and they acknowledge their struggles, but they were firm in holding the children accountable for their abusive behaviors and also work with the ACs to build awareness that violence is wrong and to contract them towards nonviolence. Yeah. On another hand, they will also try to help them to recognize that their dependency on the parents in the long run may not be sustainable at all and would engage them in long-term planning in areas such as employment and also to strengthen their social support network. And finally, many of these ACs also were observed to have symptoms of mental health conditions, but tended to not have any formal diagnosis and may not have been receiving adequate support. So social workers would also take that step where possible to make referrals to provide more mental health support, which could also help to alleviate the use of violence. Yeah, and in response to the last research question on social workers' evaluation of their experiences, I think majority of them shared their observations that societal stigma and shame revolving family violence actually really affected parents' willingness to disclose their experience of abuse and to seek help from professionals. So one participant shared that the societal expectation that parents should provide care for their children and perhaps to a certain extent also tolerate their child's behavior could discourage parents from setting firm boundaries with their children and encourages this continued process of accommodation of the AC's needs and hinders the help-seeking process. I think another point that they noted was that there is a lack of specialized knowledge about ACPA in the local Singapore context, and their responses demonstrated that they actually had to rely quite a lot on practice wisdom and knowledge from other theories and sources to inform their decision-making in the assessment and intervention process. Yeah, so for implications for social work practice, I think the research findings really suggest that ACPA is a complex and multifaceted issue that needs to be addressed by social workers through holistic assessment and intervention strategies at individual, interpersonal, and systemic levels. So ideally, social workers would work with both the adult child and parents to effectively address that pattern of dependency and accommodation within the relationship that perpetuates the abuse. Secondly, social workers could also receive more training in mental health knowledge, as the research findings suggest that many perpetrators of such kinds of abuse also have a mental health condition that exacerbates it. So this knowledge can facilitate the social worker's assessment of how the AC's mental health condition may be influencing their behaviors and can help to inform intervention. Yeah, and social workers can also work more closely with mental health professionals in addressing the mental health needs of the adult child and provide parents with strategies to support the adult child while keeping themselves safe. Yeah, and finally, in terms of implications for policy, I believe that the development of a screening and risk assessment tool for ACPA could be useful in promoting consistent practices in responding to this type of cases. So this could help to assist frontline professionals in identifying such cases and also triaging the case to determine the next appropriate course of action. Yeah, and training programs can also be implemented for frontline professionals, for example, social workers, healthcare professionals, and police officers who may be the first point of contact for these cases. And they can receive training on how to utilize the screening tool, as well as any assessment and intervention approaches that they might be able to adopt. Yeah, and I think the last point would be really public education campaigns to raise awareness about this type of abuse, ACPA, and the available resources to address it, to really tackle that societal stigma surrounding it, and to encourage parents who are experiencing this type of abuse to seek help, and also to help the community around them to recognize signs of this abuse and encourage more people to step in to support families who are experiencing it. Yeah, and with that, I've come to the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Setching. We are good on time. So right now we will move on to our last presentation by Caitlin. Okay, a gentle reminder for the questions, please submit them using the Poll Everywhere link on the Zoom chat, and do write down for your question who your question is addressed to. Yeah, if it's addressed to all speakers, yeah, do write it down as well. Thank you so much.
Hey, should I begin?
Yeah, yes, please.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Yeah, thank you so much for spending your Tuesday night with us. And thank you, Rachel and Swetching, for your insightful presentations as well. Yeah, so today I'll be presenting on my research topic. So it's exploring the participation experience of the Singapore Malay Muslim community in arts engagement workshops about end-of-life topics. So my motivation for this research really emerged from my fondness for the use of art as a medium for change and storytelling. So one of the projects that has always moved and inspired me is called Both Sides Now, and it is by Arts Walk and Drama Box. So it's an arts-based community engagement program that explores end-of-life topics. So this project actually started way back in 2013, and it has run many renditions over the years in many neighborhoods like Khatib, Toa Payoh, and Teluk Blangah. And I felt that the meticulous execution of art and participatory techniques was really refreshing in Singapore, where sometimes we don't really give art its full weight or value. And I wanted to study this program to illuminate the value of art in social service spaces in Singapore. So of all the renditions that Both Sides Now has gone through over the years from 2013, the one that I'm studying is actually the one that was done in 2021 to 2022, and it is called Mengukir Harapan. It means carving hope. So it's actually designed specifically with and for the Malay Muslim community in Singapore. So why a specific program for the Malay Muslim community, right? So firstly, it's because Arts Walk saw that the participation of the Malay Muslim community in the past renditions has been rather minute, And also a study by Lien Foundation in 2014 actually found that Malays were less inclined to talk about death than the dominant ethnicity in Singapore, which is Chinese. And hence a rendition specifically for the Malay Muslim community was curated by Arts Walk and Drama Box. And it is also my hope that this study can offer valuable insights to this understudied population. So each rendition of both sides now is actually quite a big project, and it has many components. And for my study, I'm specifically looking at 2 arts engagement workshops out of all the components. And these arts engagement workshops are called Kembali, and the second one is called Of Life and Legacy. So Kembali is a dance workshop with 12 Malay Muslim makciks, and it was a weekly engagement program that took place from March to September 2022. And it explored themes of seeking forgiveness, letting go of regrets, and accepting loss, where dance artists guided these participants to tell stories through movement. And the second one, Of Life and Legacy, is actually a workshop and exhibition that presented art pieces of 9 participants surrounding themes of love, loss, and regret. So participants were strongly encouraged to bring a loved one to attend all the weekly sessions from May all through to September 2022. And they were guided by artists to explore different techniques such as drawing and printmaking. So in both of these workshops, there were group discussions where participants would come together and they would share their thoughts about their art pieces and how it related to end-of-life topics. So the dance and art pieces were showcased to the public in September 2022 in Bedok, as you can see in these 2 photos. Yeah, so let me share a bit about my research aims. So my research seeks to understand the experience of the participants during and after the workshop. And secondly, it seeks to understand the impact of this experience, specifically on how it impacts their attitudes towards end-of-life conversations. So many people, or some people, have the perception that end-of-life conversations are like, it's just advanced care planning, or it's just about planning. But actually, EOL conversations it consists of a wide spectrum. It can go from practical and planning matters to emotional matters, or it can be about grieving, it could be about your regrets or how you perceive yourself. It's really a very wide spectrum. Yeah, and the third one, the third research aim is to understand the influence of the Malay Muslim community on the experience and as well as on the attitudes towards end-of-life conversations. So on my methodology, so my research took on the cross-sectional and qualitative design, where one-to-one interviews were conducted with 11 participants. And these interviews took place about 3 months after the end of their performance and exhibition. So purposive sampling was used for 2 reasons. Firstly, some of the Kembali makciks, they were not very conversant in English because it's not their first language. So I prioritized contacting those who are already conversant in English. So if we were to get participants who are not conversant in English, then we would have a translator to come in. But that did not happen lah. Yeah, so next one is that I was purposive in choosing gender because there were only 2 male participants in all of the arts engagement workshops. So I prioritized inviting these 2 male participants. Sorry, I think there's an announcement.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? Our visiting hours are now over. You may come again tomorrow. Please remember to bring your belongings along as you leave the hospital. Our staff will be advising you to leave the ward so that patients can rest. Thank you for your cooperation. Good night.
Sorry about
Ladies
this.
and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? Our visiting hours are now over. You may come again tomorrow. Please remember to bring your belongings along as you leave the hospital.
Caitlin, maybe I just interrupt.
Advising you to leave the ward so that
I think
patients
it's like
can rest.
1 more second.
Thank you for your cooperation. Good night.
Yeah, so sorry about that because I'm working in a hospital. So there's like the 8 p.m. announcement. Yeah.
No problem. Yeah, please carry on. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. So I was talking about my methodology lah. Yeah, there was only 2 male participants in all of the arts engagement workshops. So I really prioritized contacting them to invite them so that I can get a better representation of the male opinion and male voice. So let me present my findings. I'll present my findings in the way that my research aims are structured. So from experience to impact and then to Malay Muslim culture. Firstly, participants shared how art making really enabled them to become more perceptive and sensitive towards their raw emotions. Secondly, the art making was an opportunity for abstract feelings to be expressed into a tangible art piece. Especially these feelings, sometimes they are very difficult to express in words, such as death anxiety. So I think when they are able to express these feelings, it really gave them a sense of catharsis. So next, participants found the workshop community to be a space where they can really have open and vulnerable conversations on end-of-life topics that may be met with apprehension in the wider Malay Muslim community. And these discussions allowed them to consider and reconcile different participants' experience and perspective on EOL matters. And next, in order to present a meaningful and poignant art piece to the audience, participants have to organize and make sense of their end-of-life experience to form coherent narratives that can be presented into their art pieces. And these reflections during the workshop brought several participants to this place of acceptance with their past regrets and losses, because they are able to gain new perspectives whenever they revisit and reflect on these memories during their workshop. So moving on, we also have findings on the impact of how this experience shaped their attitudes towards having end-of-life conversations. So through my study, right, I realized that attitudes to end-of-life conversations can largely comprises of two components. Firstly, their desire to have the conversations, and secondly, their readiness to have the conversations. And in turn, this attitude reflects in their actions. So firstly, in their desire, many participants express a heightened awareness of the importance of having end-of-life conversations. And because of this, they have a desire to engage in it. And a few of them actually felt that there's no significant change after the workshop. This is especially for those who already had prior desire to have these conversations, regardless of whether they came for the workshop or not. And while almost all of the participants had a desire, not all of them were ready. So some of them felt that they were not ready, while others actually felt that they are actually quite ready now after the workshop. And we'll explore these reasons later in the presentation. Next, for action. So those who were ready, they directly initiated conversations with their families. And those who were not ready, they attempted indirect methods. And a very small of them, they did not take action because maybe they did not desire to even have these conversations. So what do I mean by direct and indirect methods? So actually the workshop, it gave a lot of opportunities for direct and indirect ways where people can attempt to have end-of-life conversations with their families. So one example of a direct action or direct conversation is our participant Farah. She was in the Life and Legacy workshop with her father. And when she was part of this workshop, right, they would go home and then they would take a lot of these conversations that they hear during the workshop, and they would have direct conversations with each other to discuss what people have been saying during the workshop, what are their opinions on other people's experiences. And for Kembali participants, they often went home and they shared their experience with their family. They would show videos of their rehearsal and they'll talk about what the performance means, and they would share about their feelings about these end-of-life topics. And for indirect action, some participants, they did not feel comfortable to talk about end-of-life topics with their families. So what they did was that they actually asked their families to come down to the exhibition so that they do not have to have the conversation directly with their families. And instead, their families can just look at the art pieces, they can browse through the gallery, and they can watch the performance. And the families are interacting with the exhibition and the art piece itself instead of the participants themselves. So I'll also be sharing on the influencing factors that impact participants' desire, readiness, and action. And several of these factors actually relate to Malay Muslim culture. So firstly is actually the cultural attitudes. And interestingly, interviewees had really varied perceptions of how Malay Muslim cultural attitudes will impact end-of-life conversations. So some of them suggest that culture is conservative and that inhibits end-of-life conversations. And secondly, in contrast to these people, right, secondly, there's a group where they feel that actually it's quite easy to have end-of-life conversations in a community because it's a religious community and they have this sense of death acceptance from religion. And next, there was also a group of people who felt that actually these conversations are difficult to have regardless of culture. Or they also feel that within a culture, there can be many different attitudes. So these varied sentiments really highlight the heterogeneity of cultural and religious viewpoints within a culture, and it really reminds us how the impact of culture should be considered in a nuanced manner. So the second finding we have is on religious beliefs. A recurring topic in the interviews was this tendency for Malay Muslim community members to leave things to God because they believe that matters of life and death has already been predetermined and there's no point discussing about it. So while some participants, they do align with these beliefs, others saw this as like a misguided stance and they do not agree with this stance because they feel that it obstructed end-of-life conversations. So these participants felt that these participants also highlighted how in Malay Muslim community, many people prepare for death in a spiritual manner, such as through praying or becoming closer to God. And because of that, they do not think about the practical preparation for death. So one participant, her pseudonym is Putri, she said that financial and medical planning may seem like worldly things and they don't seem to prepare for your afterlife, but actually it involves preparing the people around you. And I think this matters because how other people cope after your death is also important spiritually and it's important for your afterlife. So thirdly, many participants perceive end-of-life conversations as conversations that will burden and stress their families with their future care needs. So other than stress, it was also perceived to bring death anxiety. One participant, we call him Imran, he explained that this stemmed from the belief in religious judgment after death. So he says that, I think for the Malay Muslim community, religion comes first. And when you talk about death, it's about facing your judgment, whether you go to hell or heaven. So the fear of talking about death, the fear of being judged by God is quite real. So other than these three factors, there are also prominent factors that are not so specific to Malay Muslim culture. So the first one is family emotional intimacy as well as family receptivity. And participants who feel that their families are not receptive or are not vulnerable with each other enough, they do not feel comfortable having these conversations. And then for age and generation, some participants who were adult children, they felt that it was very difficult to have these conversations with their parents who are of a different generation because they feel that the parents are less reflective in that sense and less open to have these conversations. And lastly, the sense of urgency. Many participants felt that there's no imminent need to have this conversation, like, oh, no one is on their deathbed yet, no one is sick yet, so I don't have to talk about it yet. Yeah, so there was this sentiment that was quite prominent. For my implications and limitations, the first implication, it would be that I think in light of the discussion of the different religious stances in the community, the helping professions can really better equip ourselves when we have awareness not just of different religions, but the different nuances and different extents of beliefs within a single religious community. So we can consider how these different nuances and beliefs can impact one's behavior. And I think future initiatives can really consider how to appeal to a range of different religious stances within one community. And next, as discussed, people feel discomfort having to disclose their private thoughts and feelings when there is a lack of family intimacy. And this often stems from very entrenched family communication patterns. And a valuable learning point from this workshop was how it was intentionally designed to create opportunities for indirect communication, or such as like inviting their family members to the performance or the exhibition. And I think future efforts can really consider more of such methods where we really intentionally design our programs to have indirect communication, to allow indirect communication methods, to accommodate the different levels of comfort for end-of-life conversations. So for my limitations, firstly, there were only 2 male participants in the workshop, and both of them were contacted, but only one eventually participated in the interview. Next, a small number of participants did not have English as their first language. So while they were generally conversant in English, there is a lack of fluency that could have led to some lost nuances or less meaning and less depth in their responses. So to navigate this, a lot of clarifying questions were asked whenever required to ensure understanding and clarity. Yeah, so I hope that there's some insights on the Malay Muslim community's attitudes towards end-of-life conversations, as well as art as a medium for EOL conversations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Caitlin. So yeah, sorry for the interruption just now. So right now we will move to the combined Q&A session with all three presenters. So may I invite everyone to turn on your video camera for this. Yeah, okay. Let me spotlight. Okay. Okay, so before I start the Q&A, I just saw some administrative questions I'll address first. So there are some questions on sharing of thesis and slides. So for this webinar, we will not be sharing the slides and thesis, especially for thesis due to intellectual property concerns. But nonetheless, what I will share after the webinar is the link to this webinar recording as well as the speakers' email addresses. So if you have any follow-up questions for them, do feel free to email them at their respective email address. Okay, so while the questions are still coming in on Poll Everywhere, maybe I'll just start off a general question for all of you first. So what got you personally interested, or what motivated you to embark on research for your respective topics for your honors thesis? Yeah, maybe you can go in the same sequence. Rachel first.
All right, sure. So actually, before the honors thesis, I did a previous research paper on like technology facilitated violence, which is actually how domestic violence can be perpetuated by technology lah. So it kind of also got me interested in the ways that technology interacts with, I think, social services. Like for example, like how like technology can be used to like monitor or stalk the victim by the abuser. So like during that research process, I was quite like made hyper aware of how important privacy is. So I did want to explore that on some level for my honors thesis.
Okay, switching.
Yeah. I think for myself, it was during my second internship at a family violence specialist center. Yeah, then came across a lot of cases of different kinds of family violence. And that actually like piqued my interest to want to seek more understanding about, like why family violence occurs in Singapore, how it might manifest in different forms. And I think from there, then I slowly started to look at, which specific types of family violence I might want to research into. And I think for myself, because I looked at adult child to parent abuse, and I realized that actually like in the Singapore context, there's not much research being done on it. Yeah, so that's how I eventually decided on that specific topic.
Yeah. Caitlin. Yeah, I understand you explain a bit in your presentation. Yeah, you can. Do you have anything to add on, or were you a participant of one of the workshops before? Yeah.
So I actually, as I mentioned, I was actually quite interested in both sides now, especially because I think the artistic method that they use is very participatory. They really try their best to reduce any top-down approaches and make it as bottom-up, or more like they really incorporate ground voices of the community. Yeah, and I was a volunteer for this rendition that I presented about. So I think that if anyone else is interested, you can go and check them out lah.
Okay. Thanks. So I will move on to common questions that concern research methods first. Yeah. So maybe just to start off, I understand I didn't ask you all to focus on this, but there's a question about how did you conduct data analysis? So given that all three of you did interviews, yeah, how was the data analysis process? And relatedly, what is the role of your thesis supervisor in terms of the data analysis? Yeah, anyone can go first, or yeah.
Yeah, I can start off first also. So for mine, for my set of interviews, I transcribed them and I used thematic analysis to identify some of the themes, like the common factors brought up by participants. And my research supervisor, which was Dr. Lee Jong-wook in NUS, she helped me identify which are the relevant teams and how to structure the points so it made like sense within like the teams in the party.
Okay.
Yeah, I think for myself was also qualitative thematic analysis. So similarly also to do the transcriptions for each interview, then looking through each one to find out like, what are some quotes that I can identify. And then from there, zooming out to see what are some of the common quotes that can be drawn out into bigger themes. Yeah, so I think in terms of supervisor, my supervisor was Dr. Srini. I think he was able to help me to look at the bigger perspective. I think because initially it was a lot of focus on the individual quotes, but yeah, I think through supervision with him and speaking to him, then able to better draw out the bigger themes. Yeah, so I think definitely can speak to the supervisor to gain different perspectives also.
For me, I did the same. It was also qualitative analysis, transcribing, doing quotes, and then finding the different levels of quotes. For me, my supervisor was Dr. Lee Gyok Ling, who also she really specializes in end of life and grief topics as well. Yeah, so I think she was really helpful in terms of pointing me back to my research question and how these quotes are relevant. I think one of the difficulty we might have faced is that there are so many good quotes for us and we don't really know like which one is the best one, or we want to put everything in. So I think Dr. Lee was really very helpful in keeping me focused as to which quote is the most important one. Yeah.
Okay. So there are a few questions about ethics that are directed to Swetching first, but yeah, it's applicable for all of you. So I'll just ask Swetching the ethics question. Yeah, especially given that your topic concerns abuse, especially abuse within the family. What are some of the ethical considerations that you face, and yeah, how do you address them?
Yeah, so I think initially my hope was to be able to interview directly like the victims and perpetrators of such cases, but I think at thesis level it wasn't possible to do that. Yeah, so I think therefore I turned to looking at more of like social work level. As a social worker, how can we assess, intervene, and really support families? Yeah, I think in terms of ethical considerations, definitely also to ensure that, when the social workers are sharing about cases, there's no identifiable information. So they would just share more generally what are certain trends or patterns that they note. But in terms of sharing about individual cases, no identifiable data. Yeah.
Okay. What about for Caitlin? I mean, this is not about abuse, but still the end of life conversations is a sensitive topic. So how do you deal with this kind of sensitivity in your interviews?
The first thing that we did was we include and exclude certain participants from being from the invitation. So we were mindful to speak to the arts walk organizations, arts walk organizers, as well as I think because some of the participants they come from Good Life, yeah. So we were mindful to not to have participants who do not have any mental health conditions currently, specifically like depression, and because not that they should not be sharing their views, but I think it's to be ethical in terms of, if I'm going to talk about emotional topics, am I able to attend to them enough and attend to their emotions enough? So that was the first thing in terms of like exclusion criteria. Second thing is that during the interview, we specified many times like at the start and in the middle to say that if at any point you're uncomfortable, you are safe to voice it out, and the rights and onus is always in you to stop the interview. And if you want to completely stop the interview, then you are also allowed to say that you don't want your data at all, or you don't want this part of the interview to remain inside our data, and you can ask for it to be completely deleted. Yeah, so that was how we ensured that. And for participants who were getting like rather emotional, I think it's really a lot of attending to their emotions at that point, like especially with all the social work skills that we learn in school. And like surprisingly, at the end of the sessions, many of them felt very comforted, to be able to have a space to really talk and share about all these emotional topics.
Okay. Yeah, for Rachel, maybe not so much of sensitivity, but yeah, something that Swetching mentioned, which is she explained why she mentioned she interviewed social workers instead of the clients themselves. So what about for your case? What's the reason why you interviewed social workers and not the clients?
Yeah, because part of my work wanted to focus on social workers, particularly because of my previous research topic where I focused more on clients. So for this, I actually kind of want to try something new and interview it from the social workers perspective. Because my previous research was on how clients were affected by privacy breaches and how technology can affect domestic violence claims. So this time I did want to try on social workers. And honestly, I have to admit part of it is also the accessibility. Because social workers, I would say the ethical processes did come into play because there were less loopholes, like administrative hoops to jump through if I chose to interview a less vulnerable population.
All right. Okay. Yeah, so another thing related to this, I guess is the issue of positionality, right? So both Swetching and Rachel interviewed social workers. So as social workers yourselves, how do you think this might have affected how you interpreted the findings, or how do you think this might have affected even the interviews, the way you conduct interviews, or the way that your interviewees respond to your questions? Yeah, do you have any thoughts of this? Yeah, Rachel or Swetching first.
Yeah. Okay, I think for mine, because I did interview people I knew, I tried to ask, because I did want to diversify the sectors. So I did interview my acquaintances where I already knew they worked in different sectors. So I wanted to get a variety of responses. But of course, can you imagine, I think the interview process was a bit more casual, I would say, because we were already friendly on some level. But I do think I tried to keep it more professional, and I try to invite them not to talk about more personal subjects. And I also say I definitely did have my own views and thoughts about the some of the privacy practices that they were sharing with me. I will be using Google Drive is not very safe, but of course I tried to I definitely did not voice my opinions when they were sharing with me. I tried to work with an open mind, and I bounced it off my supervisor to hope that all my biases were taken out of my work.
Swetching, any comments?
Yeah. I think for myself, in terms of, because I'm interviewing social workers rather than the victims or perpetrators in these cases. So I think with that, I had to rethink the direction of the thesis, and also how to scope the thesis. Because I think when talking to social workers, sometimes it's also more of secondhand info. I'm not hearing directly from the parents or the adult children, what is the experience like, or what is their perspectives, motivations, etc. So I think to focus more on the assessment and intervention level for social workers. And yeah, I think that's also something that I suggested for future research, to look into interviewing, if possible, directly, so that we can better understand, what are some of the root causes of this kind of abuse also.
Okay. So for Caitlin is perhaps if I may presume, is an opposite case. You didn't interview social workers. So for you highlighted that you anticipated maybe you might need translators, but in the end you don't need to. But even though your respondents are speaking in English, do you think there might be some meanings that have been lost because they have to converse in English? Or what are some of your thoughts of the interview, given that you're not a Malay Muslim interviewer?
So out of the 11 participants, I would say maybe 3 to 4 of them were less conversant in English. The rest had rather regular fluency or high fluency. So for the 3 to 4 participants, a lot of times I felt that not a lot of times, but there are moments where I felt that, I don't feel that they understand my question fully. So then we would go like in a slight tangent away from the question, and I would have to kind of clarify what they think I was asking them, and then after that clarify what I was actually asking. Yeah, so there were these like moments of break where we would go off tangent, and I think there was like the flow wasn't perfect, but because we did like go slightly off tangent, there were like other insights that I incidentally find out. Yeah, so I think that was quite interesting. But I think overall, with the use of a lot of like clarifying questions, it was helpful. And with regards to your question on me not being a Malay Muslim and being basically like a community outsider, I think it was helpful and not helpful. Yeah, in the sense where it was not helpful, or it was less helpful because I think there were some things that will fly by me. Maybe they are referring to a cultural practice, and sometimes they say it very quickly in passing, and they say it so quickly that I don't have the chance to really go deeper or ask them, hey, what is this practice about? Yeah, so I think that's the difficult part. The good part, I think, actually, is that being an outsider, I think there are certain rules that being a Malay Muslim, you kind of subscribe to. And because they kind of know that I'm not aware of these like rules in terms of like, they feel that certain things, like especially for the older Malay makciks, they feel that there are certain things that can't be said in their community, or it would be perceived a certain way. But I think in front of me, they will say like, oh, I'm comfortable sharing this with you. Yeah, but it may not be so acceptable saying that in their circle of friends. So that was actually quite an interesting realization. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, okay, so I'll now move on to questions that are more specific to your findings. So for this, I will have to ask you individually. So the first one is for Swetching regarding the adult children. Was there any commonality among the adult children's reasons for financial insufficiency, which you identified as one of the reasons behind the abuse of their parents? Was there a common reason or among what was shared from your respondents? Are there differences?
Yeah, I think I would like to clarify that unfortunately I didn't really delve into the reasons for the financial insufficiency for adult children. But I think based on what the respondents shared, I think there is that issue of that mental health condition, or sometimes it's not diagnosed also, but I think in that sense it might also affect their ability to go out and seek employment. Sometimes that might be a factor that possibly hinders them. But I think aside from that, I wouldn't be able to comment. Also, don't want to generalize. Yeah. And also, that's why I would mention that as an extension, I think it would be helpful to speak to the adult children themselves to really understand like what are some of the factors or challenges that they are facing. Yeah.
Okay. So for Caitlin, also along the same lines of similarities and differences along demographic variables, right? So I note that for among your respondents, divided them to more senior and younger respondents. So just wondering whether is age, is it a factor in influencing their perceptions towards end of life conversations, or do you think it doesn't really matter?
I think age does play a role. Of course, not to generalize, everyone still has their own opinion to a certain extent, but actually age and generational differences was one of the very key findings in my research. We saw that, I saw that in terms of the generation, a lot of the adult children, they felt that the older generation, they do not have, it's not that maybe they say that it's less reflective, like I quote, less reflective, and they do elaborate to say that, oh, actually it's because they feel that the younger participants feel that it's in their experience talking to their parents, right? It's because their parents do not have this like practice of being reflexive or being like having critical thinking, like this practice of like being critical and this idea of like having autonomy over their healthcare decisions. So like they don't have as much exposure like as the younger generation according to the adult children. So because of this, when they are confronted with end of life conversations, a lot of times they will say like, how I need to think? Why do I need to choose? Why can't the doctor choose for me? Because this concept of autonomy over your own decision, sometimes they are more used to putting the decision to the healthcare professionals, to the authority, to people with like, say like professional power. Yeah, so a lot of these barriers lah. Yeah, and another one I think is that having role reverse conversations. So we do have this perception that end of life conversations is for the aging person, yeah, and it's for the adult child to have with their aging parent. But then actually it can be the other way around as well. Like the child deserves to have that end of life conversations about themselves. So because I think a lot of our programs are so centered on aging and having these conversations for the elderly population, sometimes we unknowingly put this idea that ACP or end of life conversations is for seniors. And when I realized that there is one or two of my participants, they did bring up that when they want to talk about their own death, it becomes even harder because we have perpetuated this view that EOL is more for seniors. Yeah, and that was one of the quite a good insight lah, in my opinion. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. So for Rachel, yeah, also along the same lines, among the social workers that you have interviewed, right, were there any differences in the responses in terms of how they manage digital privacy concerns? It could be in terms of age, it could be in terms of years of experience in the field. Yeah, were there any similarities or differences along such demographic characteristics?
Yes, this was a great question. I won't touch on age or experience because I don't think I have a diverse enough data set for that. But definitely there are quite a lot of differences as to which sector they are in and how they interacted with like the different clients. Like I think elderly social workers, they tend to be a little bit more permissive with data privacy. Not because especially because elderly themselves, I think they also don't really aren't able to use a lot of data privacy measures. For example, if you password protect a document and send it to them, it may not they may not know how to like open it, or they may not know how to unlock the password. Like there were quite a number of cases of like I think elderly clients, they try to share like their SingPass passwords with their family members or their social workers themselves because they don't think they can remember it. So you do have to take a few more additional steps to like safeguard their privacy. And I think for youth clients, you also try to be a little bit more, they are more tech savvy, so they might try to invite conversations. Like I think one of my interviewees shared that the client didn't want to talk on WhatsApp, or they tried to talk on they want to talk on Discord or like another social media platform. But then the moment you went onto the platform with them, they shut down their computer and they refuse to engage with you. So I think it really does there's definitely a lot of different ways that you can interact with clients. I think definitely also in like versus crisis setting, medical settings, like in family service settings, there's also quite a difference. I think in crisis setting, they're a lot more rigid with their data privacy practices because they're handling a lot of confidential information. So I think I saw like a couple of I think in the crisis setting and the medical setting, they do have a lot more like rigid data practices. They do a lot more like password protecting, they do a lot more intranet internet saving. They have like encrypted thumb drives that kind of transfer information, where in family service settings, let's say like maybe the transfer of information is also critical, it tends to be a lot more permissive with the data.
Okay. Right. I will now move on to the implications. Yeah, conscious of the time. So still on Rachel, there's this question on among your interviewees, are there those who shared views of good practices, for instance, of organization support for workers' digital privacy? So for instance, paying for work phone lines or having a set of social media policies. Yeah, I understand you said that cautious not to make recommendations, but just want to find out, from your interviews, was there anyone who highlighted this sort of like good practices that they think should be maybe replicated or standardized across the sector?
Yeah, sure, no problem. yeah, I think the work phone line, especially the one you brought up, that one is quite common already lah. I think all my interviewees say that they were given like allowance for either like getting a new phone entirely or just having like a dual SIM card kind of situation. So I think that's pretty standard. Like typically if they want you to have a landline or like an alternate phone, I think some of the agencies they do provide it or they like give you allowance to like buy one lah or have a contract lah. Then I think also for like training measures, it also depends on which sector you end up. Like for example, I think the crisis for like maybe more permissive sectors, like your training might be just like word of mouth, like your seniors tell you do this, don't do this. But for like the crisis setting, for example, my interviewee shared that they had like specific trainers like brought over from overseas to share about like data privacy practices, because these kind of things need to be a little more rigid in their sector lah. So I think it really has to see like where your priorities lie and whether or not like it even fits your client mindset. Because if you're working with like an elderly client, you don't actually need like overseas trainer to come in because like it may not be relevant to you, that kind of thing.
Okay. The next question is for Stretching. So there's a question specific to recent changes in the Women's Charter. So yeah, maybe if I can hazard a guess on what the question specifically is asking. So given that you're talking about family abuse, adult child to parent abuse, and recent changes in the Women's Charter is about to protect family violence victims with new measures. So I'll just highlight two. One is that the definition of family violence is expanded to include not just physical, but also emotional, psychological, and sexual abuse. And the second one is having granting more powers to people with qualifications and experience. I guess, for instance, professionals in the field to be able to issue emergency orders or help survivors to apply for PPO. So what do you think of these changes to the legislation? Do you think they'll be able to help cases, ACPA cases or victims?
Yeah, I think thanks for the question and also sharing some of the additional information about the amendments. I think regarding the first point on expanding the definition of family violence, I do think it's useful especially in ACPA cases, where I think earlier mentioned that some parents might feel that there is stigma, there is certain level of shame, or even for some cases, I think social workers shared that they might not see what they're going through as constituting as violence. So they might feel that actually as a parent, these kind of things maybe just need to tolerate law. Like as a parent, like this is my love for the child, I need to tolerate. So I think with this expanded definition, I think it really makes clear that regardless of the relationship, I think if these kind of behaviors are being played out, it is violence and it has to be called out as violence. Yeah. And I think for the second point, like the introduction of the emergency orders, I think it would be helpful in cases where parents maybe are not at that stage where they are ready to seek help for themselves and they might not be ready to protect themselves, take the necessary steps to protect themselves, maybe like by setting firm boundaries with child or even applying for a personal protection order. I think that's when it could be helpful to have these individuals who are able to intervene where there's really high risk cases. But I do think also that this is really hopefully like a last resort. I think the first steps you want to take is really to help to empower parents to be able to seek help for themselves and be in that headspace where they are ready to take steps rather than to come in at like a more top-down approach to intervene. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for your views. Okay. And for Caitlin, this is not from the poll everywhere, but yeah, question so related to implications I have is what do you think from your findings, are some takeaways for social workers, maybe especially medical social workers who might have to deal with advanced care planning for their clients? What do you think are some takeaways, that they can learn from the participatory arts workshops?
I think there are already quite a bit of resources as to like guiding MSWs, medical social workers, to like conduct ACP. There are like booklets as well. I think an interesting way is to use tools. So one of the lead reviews that I read is that, I mean, in my case, in terms of the use of art, we're talking about a program, so it's quite large scale. But I think we can use smaller scale tools. There is one lead review that I read where they use cards. So it's like, you know, like we're not really strangers, right? But not those cards. They are ACP specific cards that have prompting questions. And I think one thing that they say that is like when patients, or rather the participants, are able to hold on to the cards, there's a sense of safety in the tangibility of the cards. Yeah, and I think it's like you hide behind holding a card instead of like having the conversation face to face. Yeah, so I think when we have tools and like art pieces, having these things between our conversations with patients can really ease them if they think death is a taboo topic, or death is a heavy topic, or they are fearful to be vulnerable with you. Having these little things was helpful in terms of for Arts Walk, and in terms of the researchers that I have read about. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, I understand we are on at 8:45 now. So I'll just quickly wrap up with one question for all three of you. It was directed to Caitlin, but I guess it's applicable to everyone. So let's say if you have more time for your thesis, what do you think is a future direction you will take for research in your respective topics? Or if there was someone else interested in the same topic as you, what do you think they can further expand on your research topic? Yeah, you can go with Rachel first.
Okay, thanks. Actually, I did see an interesting question when I was scrolling through the pool everywhere also. And I think I would answer that question with the question. Okay, that sounds weird. Yeah, I think I would actually like to expand on AI, like what I mentioned just now, or briefly touched on that, because it was not something I really touched on in the my thesis itself. But then actually when I was like formatting and like finishing up my thesis, I think it was around the time where I think ChatGPT was blowing up. And I also did run into some problems with that. Especially I think regarding the transcription of the thesis. Because I think typically there are like those kind of transcription softwares out there, right? But then those are using AI. And the problem with AI is it has to like wholesale store your content on the cloud server in order for it to like work with AI. So I transcribed everything by hand. And I was thinking that I was like, oh, actually this will be a lot more convenient if we could definitely like integrate AI, but like in a safe and more private way. Yeah. So I think especially since it's growing increasingly prevalent now, and I think they're also looking at like how to integrate like a lot of like new AI technologies to make our work more efficient. So I think definitely, especially with the privacy issue, that's probably a direction where we could go.
Okay. Yeah. Switching, any views on future research topics or
Yeah, I think for myself, aside from like what I shared on that interest in perhaps being able to speak to parents and adult children in such cases, I think what I noted from my research findings was actually a lot of times the cases were referred in from other stakeholders like the police, hospitals, or family justice courts. So actually the first point of contact would have been at those areas. So I think another like an extension of this research could also be to speak to these other professionals to see how these cases actually arise and how do they manage and what are the kinds of support they might need.
Thank you. And finally to Caitlin.
I think for me was actually one of the implications for future research for me was age and generation. Yeah, because as I mentioned a few points just now, namely being like maybe the experience with reflecting or their views on power relations with professionals in terms of like whether they have the autonomy to make their own decisions, and then also like the role reverse conversations where children themselves want to have these conversations but now it's even harder. And then we also have Yeah, so one other point that we found about age and generation is also how parents feel that these conversations will burden their children, so they don't want to have these conversations. But do children feel the same way, as like children feel that these conversations are burdensome, or like do children have other kinds of negative emotions or positive emotions related to end of life conversations? So there's actually a lot of nuances and complexity within the role that you play in the family, whether you're the child or you're the parent, or like how old you are. I think these are very worthwhile things that we can go deeper in to see like if there's any differentiation with regards to your role in the family and your age. Yeah.
All right. Okay, thank you so much, Caitlin, Rachel, and Searching for your time, especially given it's after office hours, and for your presentations today. Definitely hope that audience have benefited, and you have also benefited from this presentation and discussion. So before I end the webinar, I'll quickly launch a feedback poll for everyone to just share how you find today's webinar. And I'll just quickly share one last slide on our upcoming seminars. So for SSR, we have monthly seminars, and if you are not already on our mailing list, do scan your QR code on the screen to join our mailing list to receive regular updates on our upcoming events as well as training workshops. Yeah, so I also apologize if you're unable to take all questions today. So as I've mentioned, as a follow-up, I'll email all registrants, including those who are unable to make it for this webinar, the recording link, as well as the student presenters' email addresses. So if you have any burning questions, or if you have any follow-ups, do feel free to approach them via their email. Right. So with that, I've come to the end of today's webinar. Thank you so much again to the 3 student presenters, and I wish you all the best for your future endeavors after graduation. Yeah, thank you. I will keep this slide here for a while. Yeah, do feel free to leave the Zoom room. Yeah, anytime. Thank you.